Hey, good afternoon. I am so glad you guys joined me today. I am here with Lynn Rivers, and we have a really interesting conversation we want to share with you today. And many of us wonder how we find ourselves in a situation of clutter and how we're going to get out of it. But many of us don't stop to think about what happens to the next generation. Now, Lynn grew up in a home where there was a hoarder, and she was able to recover from that. And then not only that, but she got involved in holistic healing. And she has an incredible background story that I'm going to ask her to share some of her insights that she's learned over the years from her background. And many of us would like to just learn by observing. And Lynn actually learned by doing. And so if you've been in the trenches and you've had some really hard luck in your life, this is a really great chance for you to turn up the radio and listen to us. If you're on YouTube, hi, we're so glad that you've joined us. I'm going to ask that you jump into the comments and ask your questions. I don't know a better person to address your questions and help you find answers today than Lynn Rivers. So please help me welcome Lynn to today's show, and let's have this conversation so that we can be more honest with ourselves about what's actually happening in our lives and how we find the inner healing that we've been looking for. Hey, Lynn, how are you today?
I'm fantastic. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, thanks for joining us. And I would like to start with your background, if you don't mind, and share with us a little bit about how you find yourself in this space now as a holistic healer, because your story was just a fast track through all the things,
All the things.
all
Yeah.
the
So
things.
I like to just break it down as simple as possible. So I started this journey off pretty rough. I had pneumonia as a baby when I was 1 and 3, and I was put in incubators. And that alone cascaded into a bunch of traumatic episodes as well, because as a baby, you have a tendency to take on feelings instead of words. You don't actually know what words mean. So you pay attention to the feelings. And my parents, who obviously were afraid of me dying every time they said, I love you, that came out in fear. So I grew up being afraid of the word love. I never used it. Every time they said, I loved you as I was getting older, I could feel my body tense. I still remember what it felt like to just feel like, don't tell me that. Like, that's not a good word. And so I grew up fearing the one thing in life that we should all be, being involved in. And then it also cascaded into a bunch of other traumatic experiences such as asthma growing up my entire childhood and in and out of the hospitals again with breathing issues. And growing up, my father was an alcoholic and he was a hoarder, which we're absolutely going to get into. And my family had really dysfunctional connections, and I lost the majority of my family before I was 15 years old. And my grandmother actually died when I was 8 years old. For the first time, when I said, I love you, she died 3 seconds after I said it to her. So, as an 8 year old, our brains are super narcissistic and we think that everything literally happens either because of us or for us. And so I thought I killed her. So I shoved that word down even more and never said it again until my late 20s. And even my mom died when I was 15 years old, and I did not tell her that I loved her. And it all came down to my grandfather being in the hospital when I was in my late 20s. And he's the only person I had in my family left, the only one who made it to live to be old. And he was in the hospital. And I had this feeling of, oh my God, like I need to tell him that I love him because I want him to know. And I had already understood the fact that my grandma died because she was so happy and at peace at hearing me say that. And so I had worked through that, but the struggle was still there. When I told my grandpa I loved him, I started crying because it was so hard to get out. It was just so difficult to say. And so I worked through all of that. And then I lost the rest of my family soon after I was 15. They all pretty much died either 50s or younger. And then I had my own health issues like endometriosis, hormonal imbalances, suicidal depression, all of my teens and 20s. I barely graduated high school. I had extremely toxic relationships because of the trauma that I hadn't healed through. And it just kept going. And in my 20s, I ended up attracting a partner who died of the same cancer that my mom died of. And so it was like in that moment, I was actually dying as well from my organs shutting down. And so we were both really sick. And it was in that moment that I realized I'm creating my own reality. And I literally attracted a partner who died of the same cancer that my mom died of. And that for me was a really big aha moment, and where I really started changing my life and started taking care of myself on many different levels. And while I had already been in the holistic nutrition field for 10 plus years at that point, it really didn't carry over until my last near death experience when my appendix ruptured right after my dad died. And I was like, "Oh my god," like, I decided to come back to this planet. Why? And I need to put both feet here and be here and do what I came here to do. And that was the pivotal moment for me to actually move forward into the work that I wanted to do. And I had so much healing to do on my body because it shut down drastically after that experience. And I had to go deeper than anyone in the Western medicine system was ever going to be able to. And even the functional medicine practitioners, they weren't able to help me past what I already knew. So I had to become my own researcher. And I did become an independent researcher and, figured everything out for myself to heal and get better. And now I'm teaching other people how to overcome all of these different chronic health conditions. I mean, I was pre-diabetic. Even though I looked healthy and thin, I was pre-diabetic. And so I had to overcome all these different conditions. And it was beautiful because now I understand the human body on levels that a lot of people don't talk about. And so I've been able to help people get out of conditions that they've had for decades and do it in a short period of time. We're talking months that they can really transform their lives. So that's between my parents, all of my family dying from some form of cancer or heart disease, and my chronic conditions. I just took it as far as I could go and now sharing that with others.
Wow. That's all the things. I
All
mean,
the things.
all
And
the
that's
things.
a brief view of it too. Yeah.
So let's go back for a minute to the earliest time you can remember. As a youth, you were hospitalized for pneumonia. And from a
Mhm.
very early age, growing up in an environment where if someone says, I love you, it's because they
Mhm.
think you're going to die. And so that triggers on the inside of us something that says, I'm not worthy of love. I can't be loved. I don't deserve love. And then how did that affect your self love?
I didn't have self-love. I didn't even pay attention to I didn't know what that meant, right? I grew up very differently. I mean, I was in the bars at the age of 17 because my dad had no idea what I was doing after my mom died. And so it was just kind of this I just lived by the seat of my pants. I didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't care who I was hanging out with. It didn't matter to me at that point. And honestly, the biggest challenge though from that was I attracted people who I didn't actually want to be with because I just wanted to recreate the traumas of being left every 2 years and creating the abandonment wound of having all my family members die. I wanted to, continue that. And so I didn't invite people in that I loved. And I remember meeting someone for the first time, and I remember when they told me that they loved me. We had a really good connection, and I remember when they said, "I love you," I locked up and I wouldn't say it. And I knew right then that I actually had a connection with this person. I was like, oh man. And I sabotaged it right away. Like the second that I acknowledged that, I was like, oh, I can't be in this. Like it's too much, too many feelings, And so that happened. That literally actually played out into my late 30s, like really actually continuing those progressions. Not intentionally. Like I wanted to have a great partner that I deeply connected with, but I still was on this autopilot, right? Of don't love someone because it's going to hurt. And my partner who passed away, we did have a beautiful connection, and that ended in death too, right? So that kind of just like I really had to look at myself and what I was creating for myself. And that was the first time where I actually started falling in love with me and doing the things that I needed to do for myself, because it really did revolve around the pain of love, and that's what I was attracting, not the beauty of love, the softness of love. It was that pain that I knew as a child of, oh, love equals fear, love equals death. And it's the same thing for when my family members died. They all had really succeeded in something that they wanted to the majority of their lives, and then they died. So I also equated happiness equals death. So between those two, love and happiness, I kept myself from experiencing that as much as I possibly could. I didn't want to be happy, and I didn't want to be successful, and I didn't want to be loved because that equated pain, right? And it wasn't until I had my own near death experience that I was like, oh, when we leave here, it's so much better than here. So it doesn't matter what I experience here. I want to be happy here. I want to, enjoy life. And it took that extent of a situation though for me to reach that point. And my hope is that I can help others find that without having to go to that deep of extent at this point.
Well, oddly enough, the things that you're expressing and explaining are survival skills. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
an honest attempt at survival.
Mm-hmm.
And I think many of us find ourselves with whatever lot life provides us. Like we're all in different situations and we all come from different places and different things happen to us in life. And we end up creating a series of skills that keep us what we call safe. And so there
Right.
are survival skills like, hey, if nobody loves me, then I'm safe. If dad
Exactly.
is a hoarder, then I'm safe. If dad is an alcoholic and this is his behavior, then I know how to navigate that, then I'm
Mm-hmm.
safe. And so
Right.
if dad doesn't know where I am, but I'm hanging out in a place that I think is safe because it echoes what I just came from, then maybe I can navigate that as well. And so I don't see you as a rebellious teenager going, "Hey, I'm just gonna, go do some fun stuff." As much as I see you just saying, "This is what I know, and this is where I came from, and I will go replicate that because that is what I know." And I think that becomes a really interesting concept when we stop to analyze it because I did the exact same thing slightly differently. I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in a large family. I'm one of 19 kids. And so in
Wow.
my family,
Wow.
it was chaos. And it wasn't bad chaos, it was just chaos. Somebody lost their shoes and somebody, is popping popcorn and there's no popcorn lid and it's popping all over and somebody just spilled a gallon of milk. Then I'm the fourth to the oldest of the 19. And so I'm
Wow.
one of the helpers where I am the one that runs and I grab the popcorn lid and I pick up the spilled milk and I drive somebody to pack meeting and I find the lost shoes and I have to do all the things. And so when I moved away from home, check this out, you guys. This is interesting because I bet we all have a really interesting story. But I sought out the same thing when I moved away because what I was good at and what my
Yes.
safety zone was fixing broken problems.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, oddly enough, I went looking for people that have lots of problems, and then I'm like, "Hey, I'm like you. I
Mhm.
know what to do
Mhm.
here." And it
Yes.
wasn't until 1994 when suddenly I was like, "That is messed up. Why am I doing that?" Right? And I made a conscious decision that starting today, my new normal is gonna have people in it that don't have a whole lot of problems. This sounds kind of
Mhm.
twisted, but for me, I said, my new friends have to have less problems than I do. That's like the parameter. Less problems than me. That's a really low, low barrier to entry.
S Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to your story because I'm really 100% sure that everybody has a story similar where we grew up and we
Mhm.
repeated what we knew. Tell us about when your father was a hoarder and how that affected you as a teenager. I mean, after your mother died, now you have to navigate all the stuff.
Mhm.
And did it carry over into your current situation?
No, so that did not. So I actually remember being a child and our closets being stuffed with just all the clothes and toys and stuff, just like literally just thrown into the closet. You couldn't open it without stuff falling out. And so there was that part of it. But then with my father, he was what we were talking about before the interview. He would go and pull things out of trash cans. He would see a vacuum and he'd go and pull it out of someone else's trash can, right? And take it home, be like, oh, well, we might need this extra part. And his garage, I wish I could paint the picture of what it was. So it was a large two-car garage with the extra back aisle, and everything was stacked literally to the ceiling. And he had one little walkway that he could walk through to get to the door of the
Mm,
house. Everything else was stacked literally to the ceilings with everything you can imagine. Now, to my dad's defense, he did always find reasons to repurpose something. He actually utilized his whatever he found and pulled out. It might be years later, but he's like, "Oh, I have this one tool," you know? And it's kind of funny to look back at it, but the bigger thing is he had a fear of not having enough. So my dad went through a really tumultuous ride too. He lost his wife, he lost his mom, his brother, all of these people too. And so he also grew up in like a really tough environment, and he had a lot of health issues. So I have a lot of compassion for who he was, but he also felt this sense of, as long as I cling to everything else, I have something, right? Because he had the abandonment wounds too. And so I could see it playing out and how he accumulated everything. And there was one point where he was in the hospital and I went to visit him. It's before I stopped talking to him because I did have to cut my dad off because it was a really toxic connection. But I went to go visit him and I went through his pantry and got rid of stuff that had been in the pantry for over 16 years, 16, 17 years. There are things from early 2000s in there, and they were obviously expired. Some of the things were molded just sitting in there, and I threw them out. And when he got home, he called me and we had a really nasty conversation, but he said, "Why did you throw all that stuff out? That's backup food. Like, what if I need that?" And I was like, "Dad, I only threw away the stuff that was molded and expired." He goes, "No, those things are fine past date." And that's his mentality. He would hold on to everything. And I think towards the end of that, he really started being okay with, I ended up ripping up his carpets and laying down new floors for him in the house because he had a lot of dogs that just used the bathroom in the house. And I was like, you can't live like this. Like, something's got to change. And so I did slowly just start changing his house for him. And he was okay with it, but he had to like, I had to get an okay from everything that I threw away. Right. And that was where that started. And then the way it carried into my life was, I did not want to have anything in my house. I was a minimalist. I liked having very, very little because it felt good to be in an open space that felt like clean and energetically free. And I mean, well, I'm sure we'll get into the topics of the fact that your space is a huge representation of your internal space, right? Like, what's outside of you is like saying, hey, this is what's going on inside. And so for myself, I became a minimalist very early on in my young adult years. And to this point, I'm still pretty minimal. I don't have a lot of stuff. I have a lot of books, throughout the house, but otherwise I can probably move with my car and just pack up what's in the house with it. But I don't also cling to that idea anymore that I have to have very little. I do allow myself to, like, okay, like, I do have a treadmill, I do have a massage chair, I have these things that are not necessities, but they feel good to me and they help me. So I allow myself those things, right? But the second I notice that anything might start cluttering up, like even a drawer, I go through it and I'm like, oh, not using this, not going to use this. I know this isn't necessary. And I clear things out pretty often just to make sure that I'm not building up things that don't serve me anymore or are not going to be used, because it's a divine connection with my internal space too, and it keeps me clear on both levels.
Wow, that's so good. Okay, now you just said like 50 things that I want to unpack. So let's go back to your dad for a second. So your
Mhm.
dad was also expressing those survival skills, trying to
Correct.
raise a child with the stress and the
Mhm.
finances, and then the loss of a spouse who, if your mother had cancer, she was probably had cancer for a little bit. Was there were probably hospital bills? She was probably sick for a long period of time, so she didn't feel
No,
well. No?
she died very quickly. It was diagnosis, 4 months later, she died. Yeah, it was
Oh
a
my
quick.
goodness.
So it was
Wow.
more shocking to us than anything. We had no idea. So it was more of like a shock, like, "Oh, here, let me throw this one at you too." Like, everyone in her family kinda died, like, in immediate kind of fashion. So,
Oh,
yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Mhm.
So that's a lot of, just trying to cope. And
Exactly.
you mentioned your dad being creative, and I love this because so many hoarders and so many clutter bugs and people that have, clutter attachments, they
Mhm.
are creatives. And I love this
Right.
because they'll see like an old rusty wagon and they're like, but it has one good wheel. And at
Right.
home, they've got a little garden cart with a wheel the same size. And they're like, holy
Mhm.
smack, I can take this wagon wheel home and I can change one out and no one was the wiser, right? And so
Yes.
I love the recycling capabilities of many of our creative friends and the effects that it has on the next generation sometimes is not as lovely. And I want to stop for just a second and pay attention that since the Great Depression, because I became aware of it during I was not around in the Great Depression, but my grandparents experienced this. And as a young child, I watched my grandfather, like as we'd be out walking, he'd find an old nail and it would be bent in half. But he'd pick it up and then he'd go home and with a hammer, he'd like hammer it out straight and he'd put it in a little coffee can and he'd save it in case he needed it. But
Wow.
but money was tight and so was food. And
Mhm.
as a result of that, they taught their children that, hey, if even if a can of food is expired, it's okay until the
Mm.
can bulges and it's about to explode, and then probably it's not so great, right? But expired food, yeah, that was the norm. And
Wow,
so
yeah.
it's not that they didn't have enough food, but they were rationing the food and they were saving
Yes.
some for a rainy day in case they had to go back to those times. Right
Yes.
now, we are in an economy pinch where there are a lot of people now that are paying attention again to saving and storing food.
Mhm.
But there's a catch. We've got a whole bunch of people that are buying food that they don't eat right now. And so, like your dad saving food for 16 and 17 years, if that was food that he
Oh,
ate
yeah.
and he was able to recycle that food, he would have had a continuation of I'm buying new food and eating the older food and recycling it and restocking as I go.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
instead saying, oh, there's a bunch of food here and I don't eat it. So I'm going to save it for a rainy day in case times get real bad.
Yes.
And then it never got that bad and he never needed that food. And then it ended up getting thrown out, which was a waste of money.
Exactly. Yeah.
What advice can you give us as far as that particular situation and the food storage and paying attention to the types of stuff that some of us are saving in our homes right now from firsthand experience?
It's I wanna go on to 2 things because we talked about the generational piece too, so I wanna touch in on that as well. But as far as that's concerned, it comes down to a lack mentality, that we have this fear that there's never gonna be enough, when the reality is there's always going to be enough. It's just about knowing how to handle those situations when they come up, and trusting that you're not going to know what to do when you're in that situation anyways, right? What are the chances of you getting to that situation? Probably slim to none, right? Because something always catches up. I believe that energy is always catching up and we're going to be okay. And I have been to the points where I have been homeless and I did not know how I was going to eat food the next day. And that for me was the moment where I had to drop into this sense of trust of, okay, I'll figure it out tomorrow. Because I
Mhm.
did grow up with the lack mentality and I carried that with me. And so this situation where I was homeless for 6 months and sleeping out of an office, on an office floor in a 24-hour facility that no one knew about, I was laying there, and I remember that was the first time where I was like, I'm going to be okay. And it wasn't until that moment that I actually let go of the lack mentality. And sure enough, the next day, something amazing happened and I got $50 and I was able to eat the next few days. And then another job came through. And it wasn't that I was like trying not to work. I was really sick. I couldn't work full time and I had to piece together everything as it was coming. And so it was through that really reminded me of my dad and his behaviors and how he lived in the fear of this lack mentality, even though he had plenty of money. He had a good job, he had good savings, he had his side jobs, he worked with metal, but he was always afraid that there was never going to be enough. And that obviously came from his childhood at some point, right? And there's just this awareness of, if I continue living my life that way, then I'm always going to see empty space. I'm never going to see that there's enough for everyone to go around. And I think it also comes down to the fact that the way that we eat really affects that mentality too, because we overconsume. We're overconsumers. We eat as though we're not going to have a meal the next day, right? That's how a lot of people eat. So that plays into it too, where it's like you overeat because you're afraid of not having enough the next day, when in reality, we can really go far on little food. We don't need to overconsume. If we paid attention to how much we're eating and our calories, we'd realize, like, oh, I could make this budget go so much further. And then I don't have to like worry about, am I going to have enough? Do I need to buy more food? You can really wrap your head around it in so many different ways. Right. And so I think that was one of the biggest moments that I looked back on when I was sleeping on the floor and wondering how I was going to eat. I realized that I was carrying his pain, I was carrying his beliefs. And that was another big transitional point for me where I was like, I don't need to carry on what my dad believed. I don't need to continue this generational trauma of this is what he did, this is how he lived, so I have to follow in his footsteps. I mean, I was following in a very close pattern. If you see that, I attracted the same type of partner who died, right? Like I was literally just kind of living blindly, not creating my own reality and following suit. So there's that aspect, right?
And stop for just a second. I
Yeah.
want to hang on to this because
Okay.
this is really important, and I don't want you guys to miss this. She was carrying the pain of her father
Hmm.
as her own pain. And I think many of us do that, almost as if it would be disrespectful to our parent if we were to
Right.
choose our own path. And I want to encourage you to choose your own path because here's the thing, this is your life. Your father, your mother, they got to come to earth and live their life, and
Yes.
whatever they carried with them was theirs. And it is not our responsibility at all to carry their pain with us as if it is our own. It is not our
Right.
responsibility. And the first step to self love is saying, hey, wait a second, I matter and I deserve to be loved, to eat well, to have a clean place to stay, and all the things, right? We
Hmm.
deserve that. And the moment we start claiming that back for ourselves is the moment when we start opening the doors that we ourselves have closed and locked. And by carrying the pain of her father, almost in honoring him, didn't honor him at all. All it did is it made her homeless and now she's living out of an office on a floor. That's not cool, right? So tell us now you have turned the corner and you have said, okay, I claim my life back. I'm doing this for me this time. Tell us about the turn. What was it in your life that made you say, there's got to be a better way?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of different points, right? So again, I think it comes back to my two last near death experiences. The one where I was dying at the same time that my partner was dying, that was the big first aha of, oh, I'm creating my own reality. And then the second one, the last one, I should say, was that moment of, oh my God, I came back and I got some really beautiful insight to this world while I was gone. But when I came back, it was this aha of, I need to be here and I need to do what I want to do because doing what I love and what makes me happy is the most healing thing that I could do for this world. It doesn't matter what you're good at, what you love doing. If you're doing it and it makes you happy and vibrant, you're emanating that energy out into the world and you're attracting others to do the same. Right. So we are vibrational beings, we're energetic beings. And that's not a woo woo thing, it's a scientific thing that we are energy. And so as you elevate your energy, you're healing others by showing your light and by giving them a beacon of, hey, I want to do this too. And so that was the profound moment of, I need to release everything that I grew up with, that I was taught, that I was just handed. Now, granted, I grew up with two parents who were very open minded and they didn't force me into anything. They wanted me to grow up to find myself and to find my own beliefs. But we naturally gravitate towards what our parents are doing, the relationships that they, experience, all of these things. We naturally do that. So even if you grow up in an open-minded family, that still does not mean that you're going to grow up and be your own being right off the bat. You have to really release all of the things that you were taught growing up. And for myself, that meant I had so many traumatic experiences from both sides of the family that came down onto my shoulders, and I had to learn to release that for them as well, right? Because when you're releasing everything from yourself, you're also releasing it for them once they're past this life. It's kind of hard to explain that, but it's like the generational aspect of healing is when you release all of that, you free all of them from it too, right? And so while they may not have been able to acknowledge those things, because let's be honest, in the 80s and the 70s, they didn't have the information that we do now. They didn't have access to easy therapy or online programs or all these mindset shifting ideas. They didn't have access to this. So they weren't easily able to tap into themselves as easily as we are today. So we're learning to release all of that stuff. And I think the best thing that people can do is see it as have compassion for where they were because it was just part of the human evolution. This is how they were taught. They were taught by their parents and it just carried down and they didn't know any better because they didn't have access to this kind of information. They went with what they had in their small town, which meant everyone was kind of doing the same thing, living the same lifestyle. So they didn't know any better. It's an evolution to get to this point where you can release all of this stuff and not hold on to your mental, emotional traumas or your physical clutter, right? Because again, it all comes down to, it goes hand in hand. When you have a physical clutter, I guarantee you that you have an emotional clutter as well that you're not acknowledging. And so that for me was like the pivotal moment of, let me sit with myself and find out who I am, what I want from this life, and where I want to see myself in the future. And does what I'm attracting into this life match that? If not, then I need to let it go. I don't care if that's people, relationships, situations, houses, it doesn't matter what it was. I needed to let go of everything that was keeping me stuck in the old ways of living in order to move forward and become a much better person and someone that I can look in the mirror and say, I love you. Right. And sitting with yourself is really uncomfortable for the majority of the population. And for myself, once I got to that point, I was like, okay, I'm going to take a year to just really be by myself, not really do a whole lot with others, just kind of be more internal. And I fell in love with myself and that space. And it carried on for 7 more years because I was just so happy. And that for me was like the biggest aha moment of, you have to know yourself first, what you're holding on to and what you need to let go of in order to attract anything different into your life.
That is so beautiful. It reminds me of something my dad told me the night that I moved away from home. And I was moving from Utah to Charlotte,
Oh,
North Carolina, because I was going to become a nanny and I was going to go live with the family for a year. And my dad met me out at the driveway and he said, you know, you don't have to live with this family forever, but you do have to live with yourself. And he said, become the kind of person that you want to be around 24/7, 7 days a week, every
oh
week,
my God. Yeah.
365 every year for the rest of your life. He said, if
Yes.
you become that person, he said, you will have no regrets. And I was like, thanks, Dad, great advice. And I left. And then I thought about that every day since then. And I thought,
Amazing.
become the kind of person that you want to be around. And what was interesting about it, and I hear you saying this, you realized where I've been got me here, but it's not the right set of skills or the right set of beliefs that's going to get me to where I want to go. And so I got to
Exactly.
sit with myself and I got to figure out what comes next so that I can get where I want to go and I can be the kind of person that I want to be. And so share
Yes.
with us, if you will, beyond, I mean, you said you spent a year. What happened during that year? What did you do? What was the change? What did you go through during that year
Mhm.
that created who you are today as an advocate of holistic wellness and peace and patience and compassion and kindness and
Mhm.
love?
Yeah. So first off, I want to go back to what your dad said. I actually always tell people to remember that you're the only person that you're definitely going to grow old with, right? That's the
Mm,
only person that's ever going to see you all the way through your old age. And so you want to be your best friend. You want to know yourself better than anyone else. And so I love that he told you that. That is such a beautiful, beautiful piece of advice. And so with that, with myself, it really came down to being okay with being alone at first, like being okay with sitting in a living room without a cell phone or without the TV and just being in silence with myself. That is really hard for most people. And
mm,
so it comes from, there's a pivotal point in life where you either go through it or you don't, where your friends are going out and you either have that fear of missing out and so you go even if you don't want to, or you decide, you know what, I'm not feeling like going out tonight. I'm going to stay home. And you stay home by yourself. And that moment is one of the most transformational moments for people if they're willing to step forward, right? Because I think so many people get stuck in this idea that I need to go out. I need to have friends. I need to be surrounded by people because it really comes back to that fear of hearing their own voices and hearing their own soul talking and telling them, like, hey, this is not what you want to do in life. And so a lot of people will just, here comes that hoarding again. They will hoard themselves with friends. Even if they don't connect well with these people, they still feel more comfortable being around people than they do being alone. And
Mm.
I think I did that for a big chunk of my life. I didn't want to miss out. I wanted to make sure that I felt like I was seen and heard. And so the idea of being alone was really terrifying for me. And I had this, I've always had this divine guidance though, where I was just always kind of nudged. And it could have been my mom, like helping me along the way. And I just had this knowing of, you know what, Lynn, like you want to face your fears. If you're afraid of something, you always step forward in it. So here's another thing that you're afraid of. You're afraid of being alone. Let's find out what this is like. Right. And so I did. I would force myself to just stay home when I didn't want to go out. And I started listening to my body and listening to the automatic yeses or nos. I like to remind people that your body is a beautiful tool. It gives you all the answers that you need. All of the symptoms that come up from disease are actually symptoms, or it's telling you like, hey, something's out of balance, help me. Right. So if we learn to listen to our body, we can learn the yeses and nos. And one of the ways that I like to remind people is when someone asks you, hey, do you want to go out and get pizza right now? And your first sound that comes out is, that's your body saying, no, I don't want to. But so often we override that and we're like, okay, yeah, I'll go out. Like I'll go do this because I don't want to be alone and I want to feel included. And so when we learn to listen to those first voices, we can really change the game for ourselves by saying, okay, you know what? No, actually, my body doesn't want to do anything right now. I want to sit and I just want to be still and I want to be in my own space. And learning how to detach from technology, that is a huge piece of what I had to go through. I actually ended up getting rid of my cell phone for 2 years. And the way it changed my life was profound because everything just started happening synchronistically. It was like I wanted to go play frisbee. I was like, oh, I wonder if I could find a game of frisbee today. And I'd go to the store, something completely unrelated, and I'd turn the corner and bump into someone, and they'd be like, hey, we're going to play a game of ultimate frisbee today. Do you want to join us? And those things happened all the time because I was just in my zone and I was connected to the bigger web of life. Right. And so for me, it was just this really beautiful aha moment of look at who we are when we're in touch with ourselves. Right. And really learning who we are and being able to sit in that space, like we were just talking about. You're the only person who you're going to grow old with. So learn your ins and your outs and what makes you happy and what makes you sad and what you expect from others. And that's where I had to go. I had to go to that depth. I had to sit in that fear of being alone because I was abandoned by the majority of my family, not by choice, but by death. And so I had to learn to be okay with being alone and not just having people around me to fill a void. And I think that's something that a lot of people would benefit from is I'm just going to take the day to be alone, no cell phone, no nothing, no technology, just me. Right. And it's a game changer.
Well, I love the fact that you're willing to be that candid with us and share this information because if any of us will stop and we will just be honest with ourselves and we'll say, am I alone right now or am I lonely? I think many
Bingo.
of us will find that we are not lonely. We are just not comfortable being alone. So
Hmm.
you are not lonely. You are just alone right now.
Right.
Are you hungry or are you bored? Many of
Hmm.
us will find that, well, I'm actually not hungry at all. I just normally go looking for snacks at about this time of the day. And maybe we
Exactly.
could cut back on some of those things. Let's go into the depths of friendship for a second, because at 17 years old, there your dad was, and he was an alcoholic, and you were out at bars because that was your
Hmm.
norm. That was your comfort zone. So
Yeah.
if we go back to the comfort zone, are we hanging out with people that is our comfort zone? That might not
Yes.
actually be the best set of friends for us. And I love the fact that you said when friends ask you, do you want to go out? And you're like,
Yeah.
listen to that voice because the
Hmm.
answer is no, I do not. But I don't have anything better and I don't have any excuses. So I don't have anything to say. I guess I'll go. I learned something and I want to share it with you guys because this is a beautiful thing. And I want you guys to learn this today, along with the other many things that we're learning from Lynn. Um, it is perfectly okay to not make excuses and not give an answer. If someone says, "Would you like to go somewhere?" You can say, "No, but thank you so much for including me. I really
Hmm.
appreciate it." You don't have to tell them what you're going to do instead. You don't have to make up a lie. You don't have to make up excuses. You don't have to do anything to soothe their feelings. You're not responsible for their feelings.
Hmm.
You are responsible for your own. And so just to say no, but thank you so much. I love the invite. Thank you.
Hmm.
That's enough. That is good enough.
Yes.
Now,
100%.
I want to caution you guys about the people that you hang out with, because some of the people that we're hanging out with are dragging us down. Lynn was hanging out at the bars because that was her comfort zone. That was her normal. I went in search of chaotic people because that was my normal. Why would you do that if you consciously were aware? And then you go, I would not. I just checked and I would not do that. So don't do that. Right now, we get a choice. You get a choice as to
Mhm,
how you want to live, who you want to hang out with, what kind of ideas you want to put inside your head, the kind of
mhm.
food that you want to eat. If you're sickly and you're almost dead through the majority of your life, and then you decide, hey, wait a second, I'm going to turn a corner and I'm going to heal myself and I'm going to become a holistic advocate that you can, in fact, change, then do that, right? There is a way out. Tell us about the way out. Tell us about how you changed and you started focusing on your own personal wellness because that was a better way than the way you were living.
Yeah, for me, the first step out was finding yoga. I ended up going to yoga and learning about my body, like where I had stored trauma and all of these different aspects of somatic practices. And it was being in the yoga community that I saw these healthy people. Like everyone there was healthy. Now, granted, yes, there are some people there who they did yoga, after they went to the bars or, something of that. But the majority of the crowd was healthy people. And I was like, wow, they look great. They look happy. They look healthy. And that became a beacon of, I like this. And then I kind of like integrated my way into that world. Right. And then it was just this natural progression of finding people who were in that space. And then I would elevate and I got into holistic nutrition. And then I found other nutritionists and we would share things and we would go out and do healthy activities. We'd go biking, we'd go climbing, everything of that nature. And it was just this natural progression of leaving the old behind and not feeling bad about it. Because as a kid, I felt like, oh, well, I should still talk to this person because I've known them for so long. So I shouldn't cut them out of my life. But then I was like, oh no, this is a toxic relationship and they're going to be ripped from my life if I don't, just cut it off gently because the universe was always advancing me. If I took a step forward, the universe was like, okay, we're going to carry you even further. And so if that means that this is where you want to be, we're going to pull these people out of your lives. And it may not look pretty if we do it this way. So I learned how to just, naturally gravitate away from those situations. And that continued for many years, right? Because as you evolve, you're going to come in contact with people who are on that same vibration. And so as you keep elevating, you eventually find yourself, a lot of times they talk about like it's lonely at the top. And I don't mean the top as in like in the top of a business firm or anything, but at the top as in you've reached a point where you're not okay with just anyone being in your life. And I like to make the clarity that lonely does not, you can be lonely in a relationship. You can feel lonelier being in a relationship than you are with yourself, right? So I like to turn that on a different axis and say being lonely at the top is not a negative thing. It's being alone. I like to say being alone, and it's okay to be alone as long as you are happy and healthy. And now to this point, I have a very few people that I call friends. And one lives in Sweden and we talk all the time. And she and I grow together. We're always elevating. We're always talking about what we're working on and what we're working through. And we've both left behind a lot of things in our past, but we always are there for each other because we're both on that evolutionary path, right? We're always getting better and doing better. And I mean, she's going to be in our what oh man, I think Afghanistan next week. She does all of these different works for refugee camps and whatnot, and she's just beautiful and she's elevating in her life, and so we help each other there, right? And I don't have a lot of people like that, and I don't invite a lot of people in like that because it's a select few who are going to actually get you once you reach the point of becoming who you truly are at the core and what you're emanating. You no longer just accept everyone walking into your life because they're all going to see a piece of your light and want it. They're all going to say, oh, look at her, she's doing amazing, she's shining, I want to be part of that. But you have to ask the bigger question of, okay, but who are they and what's going on in their life, and am I going to get dragged into their drama, their trauma, all of these different aspects? And that's when you really start acknowledging, like, I'm not gonna allow this into my existence because I don't want to be this person anymore. I don't want to, live in this small space. I want to elevate. And that's where it really stemmed for me, was just like step by step becoming a better person, understanding my body, what I wanted in life, and just allowing myself to move forward and do it.
I love that. Tracy has a question, and she says, I say no, but thanks. What do you do when they just keep asking why? And I think this refers back to the moment where
Mhm, mhm,
we were
mhm,
invited by friends and we're like, no, thank you. What advice
mhm.
would you give to Tracy?
Oh man. So if you want, you could go from two different perspectives where you can actually set a boundary, a very clear boundary that says, no, thank you. I'm just not interested in going tonight. Like that's it. And say, no, no other reasons are needed. You can let them know that to the point where, it's like, this is my boundary and you're crossing it. Or you can do it from a more kind and compassionate space of, like, I'm just not interested in going. I really appreciate you inviting me, but I'm asking you nicely to respect my boundary. I'm just not interested in going tonight. Right. And so you can give them two very different perspectives. It depends on what you need to work through at that point. Do you need to learn to be more stern? Do you need to learn to be a little bit more like, okay, like let me put this face on so people take me seriously? Because unfortunately, a lot of people, if they have a softer demeanor, people don't take them seriously. And sometimes one of the best things that they could do is learn to be a little bit more stern with their approaches. But again, if you're feeling like I can get my point across and you can do it in a gentle way, by all means do it gently, but just let them know that you're not interested in going and you don't need to have another reason.
I want to add something to that because I
Mhm.
think it's absolutely important that we are clear
Mhm.
about moving on. And what the message Lynn is sharing with us today is it's okay to move on. It's okay to
Mhm.
move on from being trapped in this thing that we call, I don't know, honor or respect or whatever, from holding on to the way we were brought up, right? For me, I discovered that in my chaotic world, I was honoring my parents and my family by seeking out these weird situations that had drama
Mhm.
in them. And when I said, wait a second, that's unhealthy for me, and I don't want to live this way the rest of my life. And I had this martyr complex, like, oh, I'm going to, fix everyone's problems. And then no one was the wiser. But I regretted it, and it wasn't healthy for me, and it didn't make me happy. So as I decided that I was going to move away from that and I wasn't going to do that anymore, people in my life with less problems than I do and no drama. So when people would say, hey, do you want to go out with us? What I said to them, and I'm really conscious of this, I'm removing drama from my life. And so any situations that involve drama, it's not going to be healthy for me right now. And so until I'm well enough emotionally to rejoin you, I'm going to have to back out of these kind of activities. And so I slowly started pulling myself away, and I would look at people's situations and they would, oh, you're not going to believe that, da, 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 and all the gossip and
Mhm.
everything. And I would like slowly back away going, I
Mhm.
see it happening and I'm not going to get involved. I'm not going to comment on this conversation because I don't want it to continue. I don't want to be part of this. Excuse me, I've got something I need to run and attend to. It was great seeing you guys. Goodbye. And I would remove myself, physically remove myself from the
Yes.
situation. And what happened to me was exactly what Lynn said was going to happen. I lost all of my friends.
Yes.
But what
Yeah.
happened was this: as I started evolving, as I started changing, I started attracting into my life healthy friends. And they had, check it out, less problems than I did. And when I meet somebody, I say, hey, I'm a drama free relationship. Okay. No drama. So if you're having one of those days, don't come find me on those days. But if you're just like cool and everything's all right and you guys are talking and hanging out, call me. I want to be part of that. But I'm looking for healthy relationships, and it
Mhm.
is a prerequisite. I had a whole bunch of people that I invited over for my house this year for a Christmas party, and they were new friends. And I said, I'm inviting you because in 2023, I promised myself to have healthier relationships with healthy people. You're one of those people, and you're invited to my party. Then every one of those people that came, they're like, oh, I got to be my healthy version of myself. Guess what? When you tell people what you want, they can go, oh, she's not doing drama anymore. If I want to hang out, I got to like leave my drama at home. I got to
Mhm.
just bring the best version of myself. And it's high fives and it's hugs and it's people that really respect each other. Why would you want any other kind of friendship? And so
Mhm.
if you have friends that are inviting you out and they're not bringing you up to the best
Elevation.
version of yourself, turn and walk away. Those are not your real friends.
Right.
They are not. And thank you, Lynn, for helping us realize this.
Yeah, it's all about, again, it's that speaking up. Like you can give them a reason if you want to, but otherwise you could just say, no, respect my boundary. I just don't want it. Right. And that's beautiful. And I think to your point, there's also the notion that as you elevate, and again, it comes back to that vibrational alignment, you're going to naturally start aligning with different
Mhm.
people. So you're not even going to have to be at that point, right? Where you need to let people know, like, hey, don't bring your drama. There's not a single person in my life who I invite in where they bring some form of, discomfort or unease, or I invite in loving, happy, healthy people because that is genuinely who I am. As long as you are emanating that, that's what you're going to attract when you're being conscious of it. And it's funny because I used to do the same thing. I attracted partners into my life who mimicked all of the what I could help them with, right? Like, oh, I know about this condition, let me help you, let me do this. And then it's that fell away too, right? So it comes back to that, if you're inviting in certain people, you need to look within yourself and figure out, why am I attracting this kind of person? Because that's a very good indicator that you're exuding something too that says, hey, I have this problem too. Let's be friends. And that's why I'm big on coming inwards and sitting with yourself and telling those people, no, I don't want to go out. I want to sit with myself today. That's a really good reason. You can just say, I want to be by myself tonight. And if they don't understand that, then those are people, again, like you were saying, you need to drop them right then, because a good friend is going to be like, great, I'm happy that you're sitting alone. If you need anything, let me know. Right. And so it all comes back to just trusting yourself and what you know that you need to tell people in order to become that better version.
We have a friend here who has jumped into our comments, and it's Alice. And Alice is becoming the best version of herself. And in the process, her daughter's been gone for a full 2 years. And I'm just now beginning to go through all of her stuff. And it's so
Mhm.
overwhelming and it keeps me frozen. I have to throw away so many of her personal things.
Mm.
And Alice, I want to stop for just a second. And I want to honor your loss and say that
Mhm.
I'm so sorry that you are in this situation, and I love the fact that you are in the process of addressing it and finding a way to find comfort in moving on. And so, what advice
Yeah.
would you give to Alice as she's processing through these memories and these attachments that she has with the things that belong to her daughter?
So that's a difficult question because we all handle this differently. And that is a really tough thing, to lose a child, and to have to go through that, right? And so I want to first say, like with myself, when I lost my dad and I had to go through all of his stuff and get rid of everything, I didn't want a single thing of it. Not because I was, like in a aggressive space with it or anything of that nature. I just knew that nothing in that house was going to like make me feel stronger for him, or my mom for that matter, any of her jewelry, any things that belonged to her. I knew that they were just material items, and that my mom lived within me. My dad still lived within me. The memories were never going to disappear. But for the belongings, those are things that can really keep us attached to the pain of the situation, rather than just like the memories of who they were and how they lived their lives, and actually going out and doing things that they would love, right? Like living your life for that person, still thinking like, okay, my daughter really loved XYZ. I want to make this a normal part of my life. I want to carry on her memory in a really positive way. And I think one of the things that I came back with from a near death experience, and I got to talk to my mom through one of them, is everything that we have on this physical world is just stuff. And I know that's sometimes hard to hear, but the reality is we don't take any of that with us. And once we're past that point, we don't give a flying care about what's left behind. And so I could say it from the perspective of, let me just speak from my experience and say, my mom didn't care if I held on to her ashes. She didn't care if I held on to her jewelry. That stuff just doesn't mean anything to her once she's out of here, right? That just comes back to me trying to hold on and cling to something that's going to remind me of her, instead of realizing that, oh no, I happen to still have my mom's ashes because I just haven't spread them at any point. I've been meaning to, but it's not like I'm holding on to them for any kind of personal necessity, but it was more this like seeing her and realizing like, oh, she doesn't care about this earthly stuff. I did. I cared about having something that reminded me of her, but that's a picture. I have a picture of my mom that I could turn to and just like, ah, like I love seeing your face, but I also know that we're still so much more connected through spirit than we are even this picture, right? And so it can be really beneficial to remember that the material belongings that you're seeking to get rid of at this point can really hold you back in your healing process. And it's not to negate the pain or anything of that sort, but to remember that it's okay to start letting things go. And you can do it as slowly as you need to. You don't have to rush the process. Give yourself the space to be human and to grieve and to understand that this did used to belong to your daughter, and it was really important to you to have these memories. But when you can learn to let it go and to move into the space of holding the memories of your daughter more often in heart, that's going to be the biggest relief that you can give yourself and the connection to your daughter, because she's not going to worry about that stuff anymore. It's just something that you can let go of, and you letting go of that stuff is going to open up a much bigger space for you to actually hold her in your heart.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I know there are a lot of people that are hanging on to things for one reason or another. And I want to go back for just a second to the moment where you said, I ask myself on an energetic level, how am I feeling about this? And I find a lot of times as we ask ourselves, how do I feel about this particular item? You feel nothing. Like there's no,
Mhm.
yes, I feel attached to it. We're just kind of like, I feel attached to it, but I don't know why. And I can't really articulate it. And it's just still here. And I guess I'm okay getting rid of it. And that's the next question. Is it time for this to move on? And if
Right.
it's a particular item, if I don't feel anything like it's holding me here and I got to keep it, it is now the time. And I'm in the process of moving right now. I mean, literally, it goes on the market tomorrow.
Mm.
So
Wow.
we've been getting rid of lots of stuff. And some of the things that I'm ready to get rid of, maybe my husband is not. And so I've been in the
Mm.
process of asking him as well, like, hey, are you ready to get rid of this yet? And he says, do I have to get rid of it today? You do not. And so if you want to think about it and you're not sure, let's put it inside a storage unit for a couple months. And if you don't use it and you don't
Mhm.
need it, then we'll have the same conversation before we move into the new house. And then when we move out of the storage unit and into the new house, because it's a new construction, they're building it, then we'll give it away at that time. You don't have to get rid of it today. And some of the
Right.
things in my house are still here after 15 years. We haven't used them in 15 years, but he wasn't ready to get rid of it yet. And well, we don't have to get rid of it today. It's not hurting anything. We can save it, but there are so many things that he's like, hey, I guess I'm done with this now. Okay. And he only has to tell me once. Once he tells me once, boom, it's gone.
Mm.
So, but
Yeah.
I love asking that question.
Yeah, it's actually, so coming back to that point, one, be gentle with yourself through the process. It's an evolutionary process to do that, right? And so, but one of the biggest things that you could ask yourself is, what is this going to benefit me if I hold on to this? Do I actually see myself using it? Is it just going to be sitting in a room? Or potentially, depending on who it is that passed away, right? Can somebody else use this? Because
Mhm.
that's one of the most beautiful things you could do, is repurpose that energy right away. Is, oh my God, this would really benefit someone who actually needs it. And when you can come from that space and ask questions and really like sit with the product or whatever it is, the process that you're in, you can really understand yourself, and you get answers right away. Like, do I really need this? Like, I had a black screen for my photography that wasn't being used, and it was like, no, but imagine someone who needs it and is looking for this exact product. How amazing would that be for it to be utilized right now, right? Something that simple. And obviously, with her daughter, I don't know how old your daughter is, but maybe there are people who really are in need of those things. And if you could find the donation center or anything, watching my dad take my mom's stuff to the donation center, like, I was really happy. I know it was hard for him at first, but we told him, like, if you keep this stuff in your closet, you're never going to get through it.
Mhm.
And so he finally understood that. And when we donated it and we got to see these people who barely had any clothes, right? They were just so grateful. And that for me was the moment of, oh my God, this physical stuff doesn't make us happy. It doesn't make us who we are. It's just in our existence. And if we're not going to use it, there is someone else out there who's going to be so grateful for it. And when you can come from that perspective, it'll change the game.
Well, I love all of the insights that you've shared with us today. And I want to just stop and thank you for being willing to share your story with us and your wisdom and your insights. And I just want to say I love you. I think you are so amazing. And I just really appreciate you giving us the gift from your heart. So thank you. And I want to thank everybody that's joined us today in the comments. We've got some really great comments here, and those that we didn't answer during our conversation, I will answer after this is over because I would love to
Mhm.
touch bases with you. But I want to thank you guys for joining me here because this is a year, 2024. This is the year that defines us. This is the year that we get to be really honest with ourselves and say, who do I want to be when I'm by myself? And then become really comfortable with that person so that we can, in fact, be the best versions of ourselves with the stuff that makes us feel like the best versions of ourselves. So thank you so much, Lynn. I really appreciate your time today. Tell our listeners where they can go to find you.
Yes, you can actually go to www.linnrivers.com, and that's Linn rivers.com. And I have an amazing course up there right now for $50 so people can access health and wellness for a reasonable rate and get the help that they need.
Well, thank you guys. I will see you guys same time, same place next week. And please, in the meantime, take care of yourselves, give yourselves compassion and love.